Hello, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Thread. On today's episode, we have the one, the only Jack Butcher joining us. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Excited to have you. Okay, so just to begin, can you kind of give like a 1-minute intro, elevator pitch into everything that you do, what you're working on at the moment? Just everything Jack Butcher.
All right, I'll do my best. So the last 3 years or so, I've been working on a project called Visualize Value, which began as a kind of packaging up 10 years of experience in the agency world in New York. So started my own agency with this really specific focus, helping people visualize their value. So taking intangible ideas, concepts, IP that is you can't see, and turning it into diagrams that express thinking, concepts, things of that nature. Since starting it, it's become a whole slew of different things. There's an education component. So we have a couple training programs. We've experimented with NFTs. Still do a little bit of consulting work. Have a little venture arm where I'll like do some consulting and take on equity in a business to help them visualize their process and their IP. But Visualize Value is just this brand that's kind of a catch-all for my interests, and it goes in all sorts of different directions, but comes from the love of taking ideas and simplifying them in a visual way.
Yeah, no, I love it. And to be honest, I was saying this to you even before. Like, you were the first person on Twitter that I saw design these sort of very simple concepts that people get it straight away, though. Like, they get it. Really does. There's that phrase, right? Like, a picture is worth 1,000 words or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that the things that you make is just very digestible. The messages, you instantly get it.
Thank you very much.
We're gonna get to the Visualize Value, but since we're both from the UK, I kind of want to start here.
Let's do it.
Is, can you kind of I'm interested just the whole experience of you, like, growing up in the UK, how you even came to America. Where in America did you even start? Like, why did you want to come here? Like, can you kind of go into all of that?
Yeah, so for how many of your listeners are in the UK, I'm probably going to drop a few references here that people aren't familiar with if you're not from the UK. But so I studied graphic design at university in Cardiff. Before that, I actually never thought I was going to go to university. So graduated high school and went to work at Honda on the production line, building Honda Civics, and didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing that. So weirdly had a cousin who worked in a design agency. And, work experience in the UK when you're 16. I'm not sure if they have it everywhere, but the school I went to, you have to go and do a week of work experience. So I always had this, like, thing in the back of my mind that some people made a living by, like, sitting in front of computers and, like, making stuff up and playing with their imagination and designing stuff. And then I guess that experience kind of left me for a little while. And then I went and thought I had to go get a real job and worked in a car factory for a bit, and that was kind of a reminder, like, okay, this is not what I want to do, so I'm going to try and get into a university. And I went to university in Cardiff for 3 years, studied graphic design, finished that, and then got an internship in London at a little boutique-y design studio. And then one weekend I was back home. I was commuting from Swindon to London for 3 months. And I was in Weatherspoons on a Thursday night in Swindon. I met these two dudes who are like, we have a friend who works for Virgin Atlantic, and we got an extra, like, ticket to go to New York. Do you want to come? I was like, yeah, count me in, I'm in. And still working at Honda at the time. And then I decided, like, 2 days before I was getting on the plane, I was like, maybe I should email some, people in New York and try and meet some people in the design industry while I'm there. Just thinking I was going to go for a couple months as like a sort of the, on a jolly basically. And I sent about 150 emails on Craigslist ads. So went on graphic design internships. I Googled that, I think, graphic design internships New York, Craigslist came up. And I just sent an email to every single one of the listings. Most of them were like t-shirt screen printer or like flyers for, window cleaning business or something. And I just attached my portfolio, the work I'd done at university, and said, hey, I'm going to be here for a couple of months. I'd love to meet you and just ask you questions about the design industry. And I got one response from a guy who was like, yeah, come over. He was running a little agency in West Chelsea. And he took a massive chance on me and sorted out visa process and all that kind of stuff, and went through the I guess 8, 9, 10 jobs in New York, just bouncing around the agency scene, and then eventually through a bunch of different experiences, landed at a point in about 2017 where I was like, I know how to do this. I've been around enough of this now that I'm going to start my own agency. And that part of the story is a lot more nuanced, I guess, but the last 3 years, that's what I've been doing. So it was honestly a bit of a chance thing. I have my dad was in the Navy, and he spent a lot of time in America, and he was always talking about it when I was growing up. So I think that was maybe where the idea got planted in my head. And land of opportunity, I guess, was just ringing in my ears, and I found an opportunity to go, and I went, and it's been here ever since.
That's a great story. The power of Wetherspoons, which for people that don't know, that's
Indeed.
it's like a pub in the UK.
Yeah.
But that's so. I like that. It's like you're creating your own opportunity, almost increasing the, what do they call it? The surface area to get lucky. You got lucky, but you also put out a lot of shots into the world so that you could get lucky. I'm curious, at that point when you were sending out the emails to people on Craigslist, which I've never heard someone do that for a job posting.
Yeah. I think knowing what Craigslist was at the time was obviously an advantage, right? People don't think about that. It thinks where you're going to buy a chest of drawers secondhand or something and not get a job.
Yeah. You know what I've been thinking about, actually? When you're starting something new, there's sometimes an advantage in being sort of naive or not knowing what you're doing. I actually 100%. Think it's worse to be the person that's done all the research, understands everything, because you're overthinking each step.
Absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Just replying on Craigslist.
Yeah, a seasoned graphic designer is not going to do that, right? They're going to go to the best agencies in New York and be like, hey, I want to come over and I need you to spend 15 grand on this visa, and you're going into this pile of 250 people. Yeah, my pure I guess the audacity of it, or the naivety of it is a better word to use, as you described it, was a massive edge at that time. And I think that's true in a lot of things, being the outsider or being getting into an environment where you're not the you don't do things the same way as everyone else because you haven't come up in that same environment. It just makes you do things that are unpredictable and noticeable and valuable as a result, because they're just so off the wall.
Yeah. I actually think what you mentioned is such a good point, which is the audacity. I think especially when you're young, there's so much power to be honest, I don't want people to take this the wrong way where they're just going to start doing crazy shit and think that just works. But if you have audacity and then you also have the energy, enthusiasm, all those things to then back it up, it's what you say. It's it stands out instantly.
Mm-hmm.
That's powerful. Okay, so here's my next thing. So you get to New York, you're jumping around the agency scene. What are you even thinking at this time? In your mind, is it okay, I'm gonna stay here for the rest of time? I'm just living this day to day on my visa. What is happening?
That's a great question. It's a great question. So the guy I worked for first, the guy that gave me the shot, he was a huge mentor of mine. He actually worked on the world's local bank, the HSBC campaign that's in and around airports everywhere. You're probably a bit younger than me, but it's a really famous HSBC campaign. And when I was working for him, I was learning so much because he had this kind of hybrid. I mean, interestingly enough, he was setting up an agency by himself. So me as like the lowest ranking member on that team, I was exposed to so much stuff. It wasn't like, hey, you're like being chucked into this huge behemoth of a business and you have a very narrowly defined set of responsibilities. It was like I saw everything. Even if I wasn't involved in a project, like we're literally in one room and there's 5 people in there. So it like just kind of baptism of fire and being exposed to every aspect of the business. And I always thought originally, I didn't even have an idea that I was going to change jobs because I was learning so much. So I was just kind of heads down, enjoying that. And then all of a sudden one day, like 2 years in, he's like, oh, I'm taking a job at this place, but I've got one of our clients to agree to take your visa on and so you can stay. And that was not a very sexy or enjoyable job at all. But I was like, okay, I'll stay and see what happens, see if I like it. It'd be silly to just, call it a day after that. So, yeah, I think going there, that was like a little startup in a completely different world. And it was like pretty unpleasant, honestly. And then, man, I just moved around the agency scene because I did love the work. Like I love the challenge. I love the variety of it. I love the the every day is kind of different, and then moved from this 5-person agency to a 13,000 person agency after that second job. And then I think I just got on this idea of how interesting, when you're a designer, I think the projects that you get to work on are kind of the driving force. So you do something, put it in your portfolio, and then that either gets you exposure to better work within the business that you're working at, or it's something that you leverage to go to another agency and say, hey, I worked on this. I know you just won this account. I want to work on that. And I eventually got to a point where I was like picking the types of clients I wanted to work with at these agencies. This is after 8 years of doing whatever you're told to do. And that's when it started to get really fun. There's like, you get to travel around, you get to pitch the ideas you have, you get to see these things become real. There is some trade-offs. You got a lot more like political stuff. You're not just heads down at the computer making stuff. You got to be, in all these meetings and figuring out compromises and doing spreadsheets and stuff like that. But I just really loved the agency. Like, it's very competitive, very fast paced, like a lot of you have a lot of fun too. And then I think eventually just got to a point where I was like, I saw the ceiling in the agency where you get access to whatever opportunity internally, but then you're kind of like, this is part arrogance of a like mid-20s, person, but I was like, I can do this by myself, right? Like I'm exposed to the economics of the agency. You're making this much and I'm making this much. I don't like it. I'm going to go do my own thing. And there's some semblance of truth in that, but there's also there's so many layers of things that need to happen to get work done. And you'd have 10 people around you that are doing the books and answering emails and all this kind of stuff. But again, like the designer or the creative arrogance of like, I make the product, so I'm the most valuable contributor to this. Not true in hindsight, but that was the catalyst for me to go out on my own. And then the overarching question you just asked is like, I've experienced so much opportunity and done so much stuff here that I just never ever thought I would get to do, that it hadn't even crossed my mind to leave for probably the entirety of that, with the exception of a few like personal things happening. But work wise, it's always been the place that I'm most excited to be, for sure.
Yeah. I think I love when you say like the creative arrogance. And I think whenever you're trying to do something which isn't the traditional path, and I don't know if arrogance is the right word, or naivety or ignorance or whatever it is, but you need like a certain element of that, Because if you knew, this is like even with the podcast, right? Like if you knew everything that was involved in actually like doing a podcast, growing it, or in your case, like coming to America, like building a portfolio, starting an agency, all of these things, like building visualized value. If you knew that up front, you would never do it. So you kind of need the arrogance to get started, so that you have like the conviction to get started. One thing I noticed from your story, and it comes across very strongly, is like you're able to tolerate like a lot of discomfort. I always find that interesting with people that start their own businesses or entrepreneurs, which is like, if we switch back to when you were in the pub in the UK and someone asks you like, oh, like I have a spare ticket to go to New York. Like, I know there's a lot of people, even at that stage, they'd be like, I don't know anyone in New York. Like, I'm not planning to go there. I've not been there. So I'm not just going to take the ticket. And then even when they're there, they wouldn't, even before they get there, they would not think to email 150 people and like meet some random guy and then start getting like a work visa. And then when the guy leaves to go to another job, they would just work at some other company they have no idea about. Like, you're really able to stomach discomfort and like new environments and the uncertainty. And I think that's the biggest thing that gets to people. Like, I recently, or like a few years ago, I graduated from university, and everyone is looking for some sort of certainty, right? It's like, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my career. Sure. This is my career path. You want that 100% certainty. I'm curious, what is it about your background, your makeup, your experiences, that even at a really early point, you were able to stomach discomfort?
It's a great question. I think, man, knowing, I don't even know if I knew back then. I think it's kind of like your understanding of the scale of everything is really helpful. And I don't know where that came from intrinsically. I think I was like really fascinated with the internet when I was a kid. And I only got my first computer when I was 15 or 16, the like 17-inch CRT monitor. I'm dating myself now, like 56K dial-up modem. And I don't know, there's something like magical about that maybe made the world feel a little smaller than it does to some people. I don't know, if you like really try and think about what the internet is and how it connects people. And then like, I have to honestly say there's some like safety net that I had at all times where I was like, I think this is in, I've always found this fascinating. In the UK, there is a much stronger social safety net than there is in the US, but the entrepreneurial attitude in the US seems, to me at least, to be far more aggressive and prominent. And that always fascinated me. Like, I think my parents must have instilled some like more of like, hey, if it goes wrong, then your room is at home, and you just come back if you mess up or it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. And that's like a luxury, and knowing that in the back of your mind, you can just go back to that. I think if you really internalize that, then I think you aim further or higher or farther. And then the inverse of that is true as well, where you have like, when you can't fail, like once you're out of that, like when I was in the States, it's like you have to figure this out. You just, well, it's a deep question. I think there's so many different ways to answer it. There's like, I think both things are true at the same time. Like knowing what worst case scenario you would have to go back to is one, and then like painting yourself in a corner to some degree where you just have to figure out a way. And like starting a business, I think is closer to that than the first example, where it's just like, you just keep trying stuff until something sticks. And visualized value is like the 8th iteration of a business that I tried. It's like I had so many, not necessarily dumb ideas, but like just they definitely were not as calibrated with reality as I thought they were when I started them, to put it lightly.
Yeah. You know, there's so many good things there. I think it's such a powerful lever, like knowing that you kind of have to make it happen. And it's interesting because I think we both have like that UK perspective, which we can compare to the US one. And I think in society in general, in the UK, you know, you have like the NHS, there's more of a structure that's built to like support everyone, which honestly I think is great. But I will say there is something about America, and I felt it very strongly and very quickly when I first came here. I remember one experience just driving around in New Jersey, and you'd go down some streets which is like people don't really seem to have anything. Like it seems very like kind of sketchy. Like you can just tell like people are more like on the streets and stuff and homeless and all these things. And then you'll go down a few other streets and you'll go to these neighborhoods with like massive homes, like basketball court, swimming pool, and like the inequality, like the disparity is crazy. But like very early on, it kind of gets cemented into your mind. You're like, I need to make it here because if I don't make it, it's either real bad or real good. And obviously, there's like
it's a very extreme. Yeah, you're right.
And I think it can be problematic. But I guess life is a lot about trade-offs. And I think one of the other things is like, it makes you more daring. Like you're like, okay, you're like, I'm gonna try and swing
Take
so that
shots,
I can hit to the basketball courts, like where they have the basketball court in the house. I think it's definitely like an interesting point. What the environment, it kind of just pulls from you. And I've definitely had situations where you're kind of just forced into doing things that are more audacious because it's just what the timing, what the environment calls for.
Yeah, you know, I think New York specifically as well is like a huge recalibration of just what's possible, like what the density of people in a place like that really changes your model of the world. At least it did for me, where like I grew up in a reasonably sized town, you know, like nothing crazy, nothing like super rural or super dense, like just very middle of the road. And you go to a place that's so extreme, and I think that starts to even subconsciously influence your model of the world, where you think about like 5 million people take the subway every day, you know, and the idea that there's not a better version of your day out there, or there's not a better thing to be spending your time on, it kind of shatters that illusion when you see that amount of density. And growing up in a place that doesn't have that, I think the internet is getting some people there, but there's really no substitute for like feeling that and seeing it in person. And I definitely credit that to just rewiring my brain a little bit. And I used to run these errands on when I had my first job. I was like the intern for a year. I was like making tea and delivering packages and doing whatever needed to be done. And I would just get sent around New York and go up into these buildings, just like picking up some vintage magazine from something, and like go to these really weird businesses and just saw so much crazy variation in every day that just widens your perspective to the point where you think, wow, somebody's making a living literally selling old magazines in some like 25th floor room in some massive building in New York. And I think working with like different types of businesses and industries in an agency is like a really, really interesting way to get exposure to like the ins and outs of commerce and all these different ways. And that definitely just is a perspective widening thing that helps you connect different dots.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I remember my my friends, like my best mates from London, coming over to New York to visit me at the start of this year. And we took like this kind of boat trip where you could like see the city, you could see the Statue of Liberty. And I remember we were talking and we're like, the scale of New York, it's crazy. Like you see like the amount of like skyscrapers, like really big like sky rises and apartment buildings. You're like, there's just so much of everything here, so much like wealth, so much opportunity, so many like possibilities. And it kind of just opens your mind to the fact that it's like limitless. And it's weird because I grew up in London, which is also like a massive city, a lot of diversity, a lot of different things happening. But New York just feels like a different scale. It feels like London on steroids to me. Like it's
Yeah, it's different. The energy is different. The people are different. It is like London's a special place too, for sure. But I've spent loads of time in London before coming to New York, and I'd never got that same like shock. And I think maybe because you're living in the same country, there isn't the like level of culture shock. Even the same language, because I always thought that too. Like, oh, people speak the same language, but the culture is very, very different.
I'm curious. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had just stayed in England? Because it seems like that point of you taking that chance to just go to New York, it seems like a pivot. It seems like such a turning point. Like it seems like a lot of things changed from that. Do you ever think about what it would have been like if you had just stayed in England?
Yes, not really at length, but I have thought about it. I think I definitely was on a similar path career-wise, like similar types of businesses. But I think I just don't think the degree of audacity would have been the same. That would be my that's my gut anyway. Like the things that I got to do working out of New York agencies, I don't know if those same experiences would have been true if I'd have stayed in London. I'm basing that off of nothing, but I also can compare the things that I've done in my career to people I went to university with, people that work in London or have been working in London, and it's very different. It's just, but I can't attribute that to place. That might have been a different combination of things that. Yeah, you're right about it's just like a pivotal moment, a risk that the butterfly effect. You're not really sure what exactly caused what, but that definitely was that definitely was indicative of, I think, the level of risk going into other ventures too. Because I remember like I was itching to like start my own thing way before I could, because I had a visa. You can't start a business on a visa for, you just can't. You have to have a green card. And that was like, so I'd been like plotting that and wanting to do that for a long time before I was able to.
I think one of the things I think about is like the power of momentum, which is, I think a lot of the times what holds people back from doing things is they see the gap between where they are now and what they ultimately want to do, and the gap seems so big. But it's like, if you broke it down into steps and then also accounted for the fact that as you complete the smaller steps, you're going to start to gather momentum and it's going to get easier, it makes it way more achievable. So it's like, in your case, once you take the risk to go to New York in the first place, you already have momentum. So now it's like, oh, okay, I'm now going to email 150 people, which is like kind of daunting, but it's like you already have the momentum of the previous decision. But then you've done those two steps, you get to New York, and it's like, okay, the natural next thing is just to keep, like, it's like the basketball player that's like hot hitting 3-pointers. It's like if you hit 5 threes in your last 5 shots, next time the ball comes to you, you're putting that shit up instantly. Like, without hesitation.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I
here's what.
think that, sorry, as you were talking through that, I was just going to make one more point. I think the other thing that created momentum then was like, I just cut off so many other options. You know, like that decision just takes you to a place where you're like, the focus now is getting a job and like doing well in that environment. Like, as brutal as it sounds, like you have a lot of baggage traveling with you up until the point you make a decision of that magnitude, if that makes sense. Like you have all of this stuff, you've grown up around people that are expecting to see you every weekend, things of that nature. And I think that like, okay, peace, I'm going to go and do this and start like over on my own is like, I've never really thought about it that way, but I think that was freeing too, where it's just like you have cut off so many other eventualities or other dependencies that you just can focus fully on one thing. And I'm not suggesting anybody bail out on their life if if that's what you're thinking. But I was at a point in my, you know, I was 21 or whatever, where that was like a decision that didn't have negative consequences. Yes, it's interesting that has a lot to do with it too, because I just, you know, go to work, ride the subway home, write up a blog, do the same thing the next day, wake up, go to the gym, go to work. And I just got into that, like, that mode for a long time. All my friends were on a different time zone than me. This was a different, I talk about this a lot, like a different era where social media was like, this was like 2010. So you'd have like a Facebook account with like the 70 people that you knew from university. And that was it. Like, it wasn't just this ongoing barrage of people doing better than you in your field. So I think that's like, some younger people now are at a disadvantage because like getting the reps in is really a lot more difficult if you're distracted by that environment. And I consider myself fortunate to not have had distractions of that degree when I was starting out.
Yeah, no, there's a power in focus and like just going all in. I think which is what you speak to. Okay, I'm curious to hear like the next steps in the journey. So you've been working at different agencies. Where was the point when you were like, okay, and even you mentioned the visa thing potentially like holding you up from doing your own thing. At what point were you like, okay, I'm going to make the jump, I'm going to do my own agency? And was that difficult to do? Like, I feel like a lot of people that are working have that, where they want to do their own thing, but they're like, it's like, it feels like you're giving something up. Like, you're like, oh, I've already been working and in this job for so long.
Yeah.
How am I going to do this?
Yeah, so I think two things. The first thing is like being a designer is interesting. It has interesting advantages because you carry your work with you. Like, you build a portfolio of work by default, and the switching cost is much less aggressive. Like, some people's like careers are really tied to their like relationships within a company, and they're really intangible and hard to like, they're hard to take with you. And that's why you see people like, somebody moves from one company, then they hire all the people that they were working with before, and so on and so forth. And like, these people like move like clusters through industries. I'm not saying that's not part of like, there's obviously I've got close relationships with people and a network of people, but the ability to like put your work in something that can carry with you and like go with you through these different environments is really powerful. And the second part, like when I realized, or when I got access to actually selling work, so like standing in front of a room and explaining an idea, selling a campaign or a product or whatever it was, and putting together the narrative, so building the pitch deck, all of that stuff, that's like maybe the light bulb moment, which was probably 2 or 3 years before I ever tried to do anything by myself. But that's like the most important part of the process, is like convincing somebody that you can solve their problem. And just getting to that point was, I think it takes a long time before, one, anybody gives you a shot at that, or if you like, I think the way I did it was like, I have a better idea, here it is, and I'll just bring stuff to meetings and be like, I've been thinking about this, I was here late last night and I worked on this alternative, can I show it? Like, just trying to force myself into some of these positions as well. And selling the product or selling the process or like articulating your thinking is such a powerful thing, especially in an organization where people are not trying to avoid that, but that's like the unsexy stuff, right? Like nobody wants to be working on the PowerPoint deck, or like the person who's in there last is working on the PowerPoint. And then that, I think those were like the kindlings of the idea of visualized value, honestly, is like, there's this thing that's making everything happen, the pitch process, the keynote, the thing that we're building. This is like the most valuable artifact in this whole process, and nobody wants anything to do with it. That's like such a bizarre realization.
I'm curious, like the process to get there, and the reason why is like, I think everyone is trying to find their thing. They're trying to find their niche, the thing that they can do disproportionately better than anyone else. And I think because it's kind of difficult to do and there's not a clear process to get there, what you see is a lot of like, I guess, for lack of a better word, like copycats. Like they're just iterations on whoever they saw on the internet, and they were like, okay, I'm just going to do it the way he did it, because they haven't found their unique angle. And I think you really found your unique angle. And like that's a big part of your success also, which is like you're doing something unique. It's something that you enjoy, so you can do it for longer and better than most other people. So you kind of escape competition in that way. But I'm like, how did you get to that? Because I feel like it's a process to get there. It's not just something that happens magically.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, I think people see the sexy side of it too, right? Like everybody sees the like, here's an Instagram post with 20,000 likes or 30,000 likes, and they try and replicate that. It's like, okay, you can replicate that, but then what? Like, what are you going to do on the back end of it? And I think one of the things that is difficult about the like, find the thing that you're uniquely good at, I think people are kind of attacking it from the wrong end, where it's just like kind of looking around and hoping that it smacks you in the face versus like just applying yourself in all these different environments. I think a lot of people, like the graphic design thing for me, it wasn't like I was born or like, and just wanted to be a graphic designer since I was 5 years old. It was like an accident of not wanting to work in the bus station for a week that I said to my mom, like, hey, can I go and work, his name's Brett, can I go and work at Brett's agency? Do you think he would let me do that? And he's like, yeah, fine, come and do that. And then just that idea that's like was a possibility was just planted in my mind early on. And then getting in those environments and seeing honestly how easy it is to get ahead of so many people, because people don't want to like do the ugly repetitious work. And I think like, especially today, like effort is a really powerful lever. And I think, everybody's kind of focused on the shiny object at the end of the process, and like the validation at scale, which is a really like, this is like a really long and nuanced subject to unpack. But in some cases that makes sense, right? If you're a musician or something, pretty much you can't succeed without millions of people wanting to listen to your music. I can build a business that serves 10 clients a year and my lifestyle would not change at all. Like the minimum viable like application of my skill set does not need to go like giga viral for me to make a living. And I think that's where, if you want to build up from a place where you have nothing to lose as well, that's really a large part of the advantage I think I enjoy now, is like this as a consulting business is can sustain itself. And then like I was just iterating away from that, slowly adding like different like pieces of leverage, different ideas. Like, let me try this product. Let me try video. Let me try a podcast. Let me try this. And then, at first, all that's doing is just getting you better clients and like more interesting relationships and better introductions. But it comes from like really tedious, boring stuff. Like that's the stuff that people are going to pay you to do too. Like nobody wants to do a 60-page keynote. So they'll pay you a good amount of money to do that for them, or like go in and build email funnels and things of that nature. Like there's so much opportunity out there that's kind of coated in like really tedious, boring work. And there's a huge advantage to that. And then I think the compounding advantage is like being able to explain that and show that and uncover what it is you're actually doing is really powerful too. So I think that that sequence of events of being like, I will do, I could reach 5,000 people, but I only need two of the right people to see this to like to turn that into a self-sustaining opportunity. That's like, again, going back to the idea of risk, that's a different risk profile than, hey, I need to get to 1 million subscribers and then I can sell an ad to this company. And then if enough people click this thing, then I make money. Like, I don't know. I need to write something about this because it's like the attention economy and the idea that like reach and audience is valuable. That's definitely true. But it's also, it can lead people into exactly what you're saying, where it's just you're trying to replicate content that people look at. And the like activation energy or the bar that you have to reach to make like, a comfortable living in America on doing that is high. So like there are ways in which you can kind of stagger that and introduce way more sustainable working paradigms along the way.
As you say that, it reminds me of an experience where I learned that lesson. In my last kind of marketing job at a startup, I was working a lot with like creator, like influencers and stuff. Like we would do like paid reads on these influencers like YouTube channel or TikTok. And it's interesting when you work with enough creators, you see that there's differences in the way that their audience is. And here's what I mean by that. There's certain people that have a huge audience, but they tell them, okay, go buy this thing. No one buys. Like there's no follow through. There's no conversion. They get a lot of views, but there's nothing at the end of it kind of. And then you'll have people who have like kind of small, like niche audiences. But when they say like, I use this product, I love it, you guys should check it out, the whole audience goes and rushes over there. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right? Which is like, it's not just the size of the audience. It's not just the number of likes or the number of followers. It's like, how much do they really like fuck with you? Like when you say something,
100%.
Do they actually go and do that? And when I listen to you speak, I think one of the things that really draws me to you is like, I think about that Naval Ravikant tweet thread, the how to get rich without getting lucky. And it's like the principles that he says in that tweet thread, it's almost like you've lived them out. Like they're really like deeply embedded.
Legitimately, that was like an instruction manual to me. So I was working in marketing and advertising and like time for money, right? Even with an amazing agency, you have to bill hours, like time and materials. That's how it works. Like to go through procurement, you have to like, even if there's one of you, you have to be like, okay, graphic design, this many hours, strategy, this many hours, this many hours. And until I never had been exposed to like Silicon Valley thinking or startup world in that way. So I did, like when I read something so concisely articulated as that was and still is, like anybody listens to this that hasn't read that, like it's as good as an MBA and like 35 tweets. It's incredible. Those ideas just got seared into my brain. Like they just hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, wow. They actually were some of the first images I did for Visualize Value on Twitter, because that was like a really interesting, like in retrospect, like a viral growth loop for this thing. It's like I was finding ideas that were helping me understand the world in a new way, and then just putting them through this filter, putting them back out, sometimes getting the attention of the people that wrote them in the first place. They would amplify it, and I would get more people interested in those ideas into like my world. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I actually illustrated the book, the Almanac of Naval, which is like a full circle, amazing thing that came from the things that I learned from him. It's a bizarre and crazy example of doing what he tells you to do in that thing. But I think a lot of people come across that idea before they've done 10,000 reps, and it can be paralyzing, where you're just like, when is the thing that I love going to hit me in the face? And it doesn't hit you in the face. It just slowly paper cuts you. You know, it's like this slow, like, I'm a little bit better at this thing than that person, or like my pain tolerance for doing this is higher than most people. And that was a lot of what it is, more than, you know, find the thing that you're the most passionate about in the world. It's like, he says, I think, become the best in the world at what you do. Keep redefining what you do until this is true. And it's not, I know he talks a lot about like passion and play and like you have to enjoy it. And I think that is true. But I think there is definitely an element of just finding your edge in terms of like, what can you stick at for longer than other people? And the idea of, it's not necessarily the end product, it's the feeling you get from making the end product. So for me, that's like, if you can visually explain something that helps somebody understand something about themselves better than they did before, like going into a room of people and saying, this is how your business works. And they're like, oh yeah, that's exactly, you're right. We'd never been able to articulate that before. Just wanting to replicate that feeling is enough to like keep you down that road. And it's, somebody has said this really articulately. I'll try and look it up. But it is about finding that feeling that you can keep coming back to. That's like, I can justify putting all this energy, sweat, you know, into this process because I know I'm going to get that feeling. I'm going to get better at producing that feeling. And that's, I think, way more, that gives you way more visceral feedback than just like, hey, find something you love. You know, that's just like a weirdly vague and broad thing that is keeping a lot of people stuck, and I see a lot of it. You know, there's a lot of people that are in that situation.
I remember reading a tweet from Sean Puri, and he said motion then direction. And I think to your point, a lot of people get stuck because they want the direction up front. They want to be like, okay, I know where I'm going. Like, this is it. This is the path. I follow this path. Here it is. But it's like you're missing the motion piece. And the thing about your story, there was a bunch of motion before there was any true tangible direction, right? Like you had gone to you'd worked in different agencies, done different sorts of jobs, done like these little odd jobs which you didn't even really want to do. Like there was a bunch of motion there. And through that, all of those experiences and all those learnings, then you can find the direction. And it's like, I love when you say the edge, because that's it, right? Like the edge is made up of like your experiences, like what you like to do, I don't know, maybe your goals, like what salary you want to earn or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's a mix of all of these things. But I think what you said was such a good point, which is like people get paralyzed because of the lack of direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you're trying to create something without input. Like you're just, all of these, as you like summed up, like the experience is kind of, there's a Steve Jobs quote, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you have to connect them looking back. And like there's a bunch of amazing analogies where he like randomly walked into a typography lecture at school, and that's the reason the Mac has like selectable fonts when it goes to market in whenever that was, a long time ago. And it's like there's this balance of like trusting your intuition and just throwing yourself in situations where like you're gonna learn something if you've got your eyes open and this is a new thing that you're experiencing. You can reflect on it afterwards. I think people know that intrinsically. Like this is making me slightly uncomfortable, but I'm gonna get better at it, or it's gonna teach me something about myself that I didn't know before. Motion then direction is a very succinct way to say that. Just like get exposure to a lot of stuff, and I think the nuance in that is there's just in the back of your mind, like how many people want to do this, and there's loads of analogies in this. Like lots of people want to be basketball players, but most people aren't going to become basketball players. You can go and play basketball at the weekend, but if you want to get paid to play basketball, you have to be a absolute specimen, right? And that's like another interesting thing about what you see on the internet is like everybody wants to have external validation for creating whatever it is they're creating. And I think so much of that is like, so much of the stuff that really resonates is about, it resonates because it feels true to other people, and it feels true because the person who created it has basically stress tested it against all of these different life experiences. So that's like how I evaluate the stuff that becomes visualized value artwork is like, is this true in all of the environments that I've spent time in? And that, I think, sharpens the output, and I think that's what ultimately contributes to it resonating with other people. And like you say, people want direction, but it's the chicken and egg scenario, right? You don't really know what you're good at until you try a bunch of things, or you don't really know where you have an edge, like you say. And I think the other point I just made about the edge is not necessarily in the output, it's in your ability to sustain the input.
It's such a good point. I remember speaking to Danny Miranda. He has a podcast. I think you've actually been on his podcast, the Danny Miranda podcast.
I met him. I met him in New York last year. Yeah, he's great.
Oh, okay, nice. And I remember seeing his podcast, and I was like, oh, cool. I have like this goal. I'm like, I want to get 10,000 listens on my podcast. Like, I only started it recently. I'm like, I want 10,000 listens this year. And I was telling him about it, and I was like, okay, how do I do it? I'm like, give me the game plan. And he just says to me, he says to me, he's like, don't do this unless you're willing to do it for 10 years. And I was like, well, that doesn't really answer my question. But to your point, it's like there's a process, I think, is really what he was getting across. Like, there's a process to get there. And in order for you, like, most people never get to 10,000 listens on their podcast. Most people never get to 100,000, a million, or whatever. So if you're going to be one of the few people that does it, to a certain extent, you have to outlast everyone. And it's weird. My mindset's kind of changed. It's not so much about the numbers. I kind of respect the people that have hundreds of episodes, or like in Joe Rogan's case, like thousands of episodes, like the longevity.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Okay, here's what I really want to know from you, which is the reason why most people don't do this is because it's very uncomfortable. It's kind of boring, like showing up every day. I'm curious because I think now it's kind of a cool point to speak to you because the compounding, the work has like culminated in a certain level of success. You know, you have the followers, like the sales, the revenue, all of these things. But I'm curious about the journey leading up. Like, was there doubt? I've heard from you that there was moments where it wasn't working.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what kept you going?
Yeah, I think after I took the leap from the agency world, like there's a bunch of long stories here, but I started what is basically a traditional agency to begin with. And I was very, very, very burned out from the first 6 months of that. I was working a full-time job while I started my first agency. So I was like pretending that I had, was running this like staffed agency, and I was still working a full-time design job at another agency. So running out of meetings, taking meetings for my other agency. And eventually got to the point where I was like, I feel like I have a good enough relationship with this one client where I maybe have 3 or 6 months of runway as an agency owner. But again, living in New York, having a design portfolio, having worked with a couple dozen people that know that I can produce is a safety net in itself. It's like, if this fails, I can always go and freelance at agency X. And this was a different environment than today. This is like roaring, like 2017 or something. It was just like opportunity flying around everywhere in that world. So did that, and I was like, okay, this is really difficult. Like, I'm going to need to hire 10 people to do this if I want to work with clients of this size. Like, I was working with a international automotive company. It's like their expectations were extreme. Like, they want a email response in 10 minutes. They want, all this stuff. So then I was like, I basically then discovered the concept of like niching and like getting focused. And I was, okay, I've worked in recruiting, I've worked in automotive, I've done all these things, so maybe I'll make an agency that's just focused on that. And even that was like, how am I going to get clients for this thing? I'm not sure. And that idea of like picking a niche based on just something that, I don't know, something that I had done that I wasn't that interested in, it just failed. I tried that like 2 or 3 times. Like, I had an agency for like recruiting, making recruiting websites. I did a podcast agency. I did a automotive agency, and they were just all like sort of limping along. They didn't really have any like, I didn't feel great about them. It was like a real slog every day. Like, just, I didn't even really see a path to building it. I was just like following, just kind of hoping and praying, basically. Like, okay, if I get this narrow, then maybe my reputation eventually gets big enough where people want to work with me. I had no strategy at all. And it was weirdly through like meeting a bunch of entrepreneurs that were like confused that I think I started to find traction, like seeing people that were in my position that were just like, what am I doing? I would just help them. I would go to these like meetups and events and stuff and be like, let me help you with your pitch, because I've done this for 10 years. Like, you're not articulating what it is you do very well. And if I talk to you for 15 minutes and you explain why you're good at it, I bet you I could like produce 3 or 4 slides that sell it better than you've ever been able to sell it before. And that was true in most cases. Like, I could just sit down with people and help them articulate what they do. And then I was getting feedback from them that's like, I would pay you to do this. Like, this is a great service. And that's where really like this thing started to get a little bit of footing, where I was like, okay, now I feel like I'm starting to identify the thing I'm maybe not uniquely good at, but very good at, and is not like that sexy of a thing that everyone wants to do it, and is not just based on this thing I happen to work on. It's legitimately something that I could talk about for an hour, trace back like examples of where I've done it before without knowing I was doing it. And then Visualize Value, the consulting agency, became a thing. And then, and then it just got more and more dialed in from there. But there were multiple times where I remember sitting in my kitchen in Brooklyn, and my wife's looking at me and she's like, what are you doing? Like, what is going on here? Like, just because I quit like really, really good agency gigs. Like, I was, I'd climbed my way reasonably high up the agency ladder, and it's a hard work, but it's like a reasonable gig. Like, you get paid well and travel, and you got the company card and all that good stuff. Like, it's a hard gig to give up. And then you have to go back down to like, you're in these like sexy glass buildings in New York, and then you're in like some like dingy entrepreneur meetup helping somebody with like this slide deck. And like, what have I done? And man, it just takes so many reps to get out of that. And there were, dozens and dozens of instances where I was just like, I'm not going to figure this out. I never had the like idea that I was a founder, you know, like the technology founder is like such a different idea where it's like, I've got this idea for an app and I'm going to be Mark Zuckerberg. It's like, that was never my thing. I still don't feel that way like today. The idea for me was like, I just want a business that is like making the best use of my talent and pays me well. And like, it took me a really, really long time to get to that point.
Yeah. You know, as you were saying that, I think, I don't know, it's this weird paradox, I guess, in life where it's like when you stop looking for something, it appears. It's like a really weird thing.
You're absolutely right. You can't chase directly after the thing. You're absolutely right.
And it's funny because as you were explaining, I was like, when you were trying to like force the fit, like you were trying to force the niche, it was always evading you. And then you kind of just like relaxed. And then it just like appears, and that's the thing.
Yeah. It's crazy. You're absolutely spot on with that. Like, you know, trust the process is like that cliche that goes with this, but that's definitely true. It's like if you're, you know, people say add value. It's like the cliche that's like lost all of its meaning at this point. But really, genuinely, like if you get in a room with somebody and like, what can I help you with? Like, how does my skill set enhance like whatever it is you're doing or help you do it? Like that one instance of figuring that out there are more people with that problem, right? It's like people, again, want to sit behind their computer and just be like, I'm going to figure out a way to like build a business with 10,000 customers overnight. It's like you have to start with that one person. And especially if you're in the like service or creative industry, like have a conversation with them, see how they respond to the things you make. That is like a far more scalable foundation. It's going to teach you way more about the problem you solve. It's going to give you a lot more confidence too. And like people like trying to build things on the internet from scratch. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's really difficult to like kind of fill in the gaps of a human interaction or like what am I trying to say here? Like substitute for that like exchange of ideas or like the light bulb going off in person. A client business or a service business where you experience that is like such a confidence boosting thing where it's like now all you're trying to do is just make that process more efficient. And then once you've made the process more efficient, then you start to see other opportunities where it's like, maybe this is a skill that can be taught. Maybe this is a system that can be sold, that can be, augmented with software. But it all starts with like getting in a room with someone and being like, how can I help you? Is this interesting? Could you have done this without me? No? Okay, great. This is the foundation for something big.
It's interesting because it's like there's two dynamics to it, right? Which is what you're talking about is you understand the customer's pain point, and then you also have the skill set, the experience to solve it. So now it's like you're building on strength. So it's like everything is kind of compounding off of that, and you can have like a high level of confidence. Okay, I think it's interesting. I love hearing the story of like I think because I'm on this journey, like I love hearing the story of like the come up and remaining patient and taking the risks at the right times and like still remaining patient, which is like probably the biggest part of the story. But it's always great to hear like what it culminated to. So obviously you have like a big following on Twitter. You have like an audience, you have a community around your product and around you. You've productized yourself, which I think is like kind of what Naval is almost getting at in the way that he breaks it down. I'm curious, like, explain to me that the whole NFT thing last year, the $77 million NFT that you listed, the NFTs that you sold, which were worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Explain to me how you were thinking. I think I love it from the perspective it's like preparation meets opportunity. It's like the opportunity is there and you have the perfect skill set to utilize it. Like just break that whole thing down.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so NFTs there were people in the visualized value community telling me about NFTs in 2020, late 2020. This is when CryptoPunks were 50 cents or $10 or something. Yeah. I was like, oh, what is that? I don't really understand what you're talking about. Sent me a link to something. I clicked on it. I was like, this is odd. I don't get it. And then a couple months later, same person was like, you have to check this out. Like, this is a thing. And I think what I saw initially is like visualized value uses art, or I've had to produce art, which I believe is the most valuable and unique thing about the business. I have to produce that in order to get people to buy something else. You know, it's like, it's the layer between, it's not the product, it's the thing that attracts people to the product. And that is in essence what marketing is, right? That's being creative in order to funnel attention towards something that you have that can help someone. So initially I just saw it as that. I was like, wow, this is an interesting way as a digitally native creator to make the thing that didn't used to be the product, that I have always thought of as the product. So that's number one. I had no idea that there would be like the level of interest that there was when I minted the first one. And then I just started to reflect on why that was. Like, why would somebody be prepared to spend X on this thing? So I'm like, okay, digitally native art, networks. Like at that point, visualized value was probably, I don't know, 100,000 followers to 150,000 followers, something like that. So it's like, if you want to think about the value of these digital objects, it is logical in my mind that would be consistent with the size of the network and the rate at which the network is growing. So this is like a unique object that represents this network that is growing in size, that people care about, follow, spend their time consuming. And then like, so that's like level 2. And then level 3 is like, have you read like the network state thesis, the Balaji stuff?
No.
I'll send it to you after this. But basically, so the third component of this is like organizing societies digitally, right? So the idea that you can start a community on the internet that is a really, really tight-knit group of people based on the fact they're all attracted to this very specific thing, whether that's like a personality, you know, the way somebody speaks or performs, or, you know, you got like Twitch streamers that have millions of people in their community, whether it's like artwork, I think is another example where it's like all of these ideas are kind of related to one another and they build this like philosophy up that people identify with and they want to be near that. I think the next phase of this stuff is like, how do you bring like a mini economy to that community? So there are already ways that plays out in like Web 2 dynamics. So we have a talent network. So people who come through visualized value education products can join this talent network, and then companies that are like connected with the VV brand can access that talent. So you kind of create a marketplace for all of these different things based on the fact you've built a trusted brand. And I think NFTs are just like, you know, the emergent medium of the future of that dynamic. So like, do members of Visualize Value come together, build a product together, and all benefit from the revenue of that product in the future? So we built tools in Discord where like, hey, we want to get a bot to perform this function. Maybe we turn this into a product and everybody that worked on the bot gets paid in perpetuity for their contribution to this thing. Visualize Value as a bigger entity represents all of these creative endeavors, the type of person that joins. So it's like I think the one-of-one art that sells for astronomical prices is kind of I wouldn't say an anomaly, but it's not really, I think, it's not really what we're talking about where the real upside here exists in like financially, like connecting communities financially, tokens and like shared upside over time. And people who have bought the artwork have messaged me and said, I mean, all of these things are bets on networks. Like, does the network grow or not? Like, any currency is the same idea. And it's like, in the case of a digital artist, it's a bet on the fact that they will continue to create work that continues to be relevant, or their work is going to get more relevant with time because it's reached this like cultural saturation point. Like, there's artists that, I look behind me, Basquiat, that artwork is never going down in value, right? It's just up only forever because of the contribution that that person made to art and culture. So this is just the digital native version of that. And I think, you know, people kind of look past that, maybe don't understand to the degree that internet native creators do, that like every dollar I've made in the last 3 years has happened, you know, 99% of the time, people I've never met, maybe in countries I've never set foot in. Like, my business and brand is like 100% digital. And this is a native, this is just an interesting native, like new set of like economic primitives to play around with. And I'm not saying I've cracked any of them, but we're experimenting with a lot of interesting new stuff.
You know what's interesting is, and I think you get this if you like read history or like watch documentaries, these different things, you'll start to see that there's kind of like a set of principles, and it will be replayed throughout history, but like the things around it is kind of different. Like, the context is different, but the principle is the same. So it's like, I know a lot of the thing with NFTs, people are like, oh, it's just a JPEG or something. But it's actually really kind of similar to the whole thing of why like art has value, or like even why I would go outside and wear like a t-shirt with like a Nike logo, or I would want to wear like Air Jordans and pay like an astronomically higher price just because it has that logo, which is like, the principle is, as humans, we all want to be part of communities, right? And there's different levels of investment into that community. And I think what you've been able to do with Visualize Value is like, I guess almost the first offering was like, this is a really cool piece of art, and it takes a complex message and it makes it simple. So people resonated with that. They liked the tweet, which is like one level of investment. But then it's like you can go deeper. And I know you have like courses and different things, and then there's also a community. And it's like you're just investing more and more and more. And it's kind of interesting because I think with the NFT thing, it's almost like the culmination of all of that value. Like, if you had to put like a dollar amount on that level of investment, of like emotional investment, of like connecting and resonating with someone, it's almost like putting a dollar value on that, but through the internet. It's the exact same principle as like artwork, or why someone buys like Nike or whatever and will pay a crazy price for that. Like, it's the same principle. It's just like the context is different. And I think it really goes to show.
And I think,
well, go ahead.
Go on. I was just going to say the interesting thing we're seeing play out is like some NFT collections are valuable because they are like the inaugural collections, right? They're like NFT crypto native communities. And then there's, in the case of Visualize Value, I would say that community existed long before I knew what an NFT was. But NFTs are a tool that allow you to engage your community in a different and deeper and more interesting, and like honestly in ways that haven't even been kind of conceived yet. But you can, like, it's a really hard thing to explain without being in it too. Like, as with anything, it's like you have to have experienced the thing to believe that it does feel different than downloading an image, right? And to try and convince someone without having them do it is kind of a fool's errand. I think the people that see value in it and want to participate in it should be, should carry on, and the people that don't shouldn't. It's simple as that.
You know, like it's pretty amazing, like what you've been able to achieve and what you've been able to do. And I think whenever I hear stories like this, I'm like, I want to know like the how. Like I'm like, okay, how do I take this? And to be more specific, and I guess we can end on this. It's like, how do you get people to care? Like that's the thing that you've really been able to do, right? Which is like, and it's, you got people to do more than just care. They're willing to, like, I don't know, associate it with their brand, with who they are. They're willing to spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars so that they can feel that they own a piece of it. They're willing to engage their time in a community. How do you get people to care?
I think honestly, you have to genuinely want to help them, which I think people do in general have that desire. And that sounds like a cop-out answer, but let me go into it a bit more. The thing that's been consistent throughout the entire process of Visualize Value is like, would this have been useful to me 6 months ago, 12 months ago, however long ago, when I felt like I was just in a different, like I had a different model of the world. And that, like, I think everybody's had the experience, or most people have had the experience when you read something like the Naval tweet storm is a great example, where it's like, you read that and it's like discovering that Santa isn't real, you know? Like it's the same level of mental unlock where it's like, you don't wake up the next day and you're like, oh, maybe Santa is real. No, you found out, you saw your parents coming in the middle of the night. It's done. It's over with. That illusion is gone. And I think what has been like fundamental to any success attached to Visualize Value has been like being able to be associated with some of those moments in people's life where it's like they figured something out and they attribute it to being, you know, they attribute it to Visualize Value in some way, whether it's an image they saw, whether it's like a video that they sat down and watched, or an office hours that we did really early on in the community, or a product that they downloaded and used and helped them manage their time better. It's like, this is what I think all brand building is like this almost intangible feeling you get when you interact with something. And I think what helped me stay so close to it is that I really rigorously tried to think about, is this something that would have helped me when I didn't know this, or when I wasn't fluent in concept X, and that rule it gets harder and harder and harder to stay empathetic to the old version of yourself, if that makes sense. Like that's really the key to a lot of this, is like remembering where you were and like remembering how reading certain things, coming across certain things literally blew your mind. Like that's this is a whole nother thing that I've been thinking about recently, where you think about where you are, or where you like the things that you're interested in and curious about. The longer you stay at it, and the more like positive feedback you find, the easier it is to get lost from the people who can get the most from the stuff you produce. So that's a really hard loop to stick in, because you try and resist it. And I think a lot of this happens in music a lot, you know, when people make albums and then their old fans are like, I hate that, I don't want to listen to that. And I think that's like the really massive tension between like art and business or commerce, or however you want to categorize it, is like the thing that made you successful is not necessarily the thing, like, how do I say this? The thing that made you successful is so applicable and so like the service you can provide by just continuing to elaborate on that is so significant, versus like taking a risk on something that's like a niche interest of yours after a certain point. So that rule though of like trying to think back to like, my wife actually does an amazing job of like helping me with some of that stuff too. And I'm like, even when I was like on the NFT stuff, she's like, this stuff is just way too out there, man. Just relax on trying to like get people who are 5 years behind caring about that to care about it, right? And I think there's a balance. Like I want to do that stuff, but there's also like when you have proof that you've built something that really does like have an impact. Like you have a responsibility. Well, you don't have. You can choose to have a responsibility to continue to deliver that thing. So that I think is how I would describe what keeps it working for sure.
Yeah, you know what's really powerful is like, basically what you're saying is it's the feeling. Like when people associate your work with a feeling, it takes on another level of significance. And then it's like, okay, what's the next level down from that? Or what's the next logical thought? It's like, how do I get people to feel something? And it has to be like relatable. And it's so interesting because when you were talking about like people need to empathize, and then as you kind of keep building leverage and keep stacking and keep like redefining who you are, it becomes harder and harder for people to like relate to it. And it's funny because I'm like this is gonna sound really random, but I'm like a big Drake fan. Like I like his music. And it's funny because Drake's one of these artists where people will take lines from his songs and they'll post it as like Instagram captions and all this stuff. Like people really relate to what he says. And I remember he has this line on one of his recent songs.
Churchill Downs. I know the one you're going to say.
Yeah. Where he's like, I love that you caught that. You caught me.
Yeah.
Which is like,
I'm a fan.
Says, I'm making so much money, my music's not even relatable or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, and it makes sense, right? Because like if you think about his lifestyle, like he's probably on yachts. I don't know, like who
knows what he's getting up to, mate. Exactly.
Yeah. It's like to then be able to make songs that like someone who hasn't really experienced any of that can listen to and be like, oh yeah, like, I'm gonna post this on Instagram. I'm gonna post this on my story. Right. It's like actually, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm gonna actually call back one of the things that you said about like history. The context changes, but it's the same pattern. I think there's something similar going on in music and art, where it's like if something is fundamentally true, like if it's written from experience in some way, there is some semblance or some thread that regardless of whether you've whether you've personally experienced it, it's like the same reason people like, I mean, Drake's music was unrelatable to 99.9% of people like 2 years after he started, right? His lifestyle was like 0.001%. And it's just interesting how, I don't know, the human experience does map to these like consistent patterns, and you just kind of different situations kind of tell the same story in a different way, right? It's just like using different devices to tell the same story. And that's like, man, music has been, I listen to a lot of music. I've been like desperate to like figure out how to make music my whole life. It's just not really my inherent skill set, and maybe I'll find the time to get into it, but maybe I've been too leverage pilled to ever like spend the time on it. But the concept of a song is so fascinating and amazing in that exact way. Is like you can bottle up a feeling that you listen to a song that like, say a song, when I moved to New York, the first time I lived, like the first few weeks I lived in New York, Kanye's Good Fridays were coming out every Friday.
Yeah.
So if I ever listen to any one of those songs, I'm like instantly transported to like, you know, I'm walking around the streets of New York, 22-year-old kid, like thinking I'm the frickin' Don, right? I get this feeling from it every time I hear it. And it's like, that is the most amazing piece of media, the most amazing, there's just something so profound about being able to embed all that feeling in something. And then whenever it plays, people feel that. I think that's why TikTok and all of these platforms that have music so integrated in them now are just like completely blowing up, because the song becomes the thing that is like the distribution for all of these different expressions. And man, music is like the ultimate media, I think. Anyway, that was a tangent.
No, you should actually do that. You should do like some, I don't know how you would do it. I think it's one of those interesting things for me. I'm like, when I think about what I want to do, when I like frame it in my mind, I'm like, I want like the younger version of Callum to like look at me and as I progress and be like, that guy's like really cool. Like I achieved like all the if I wanted to be like if I wanted to be like a singer growing up, it's like I just put out like one song and it didn't even make sense. So like it wouldn't even make sense. It'd be like he does a podcast and marketing and
Right.
and then he also has like a single. Like it makes no sense. But I just feel like the younger version of me would be like, that guy's he's cool as
Yeah, that's the way to do it for sure.
Yeah.
There's a good Matthew McConaughey speech on that if you've seen that. My hero is me in 5 years' time or something. It's a good little framework.
Yeah, for sure. You know what? I told myself, I was like, I'm not having any interviews go past an hour. But then we just kept talking and it was like an hour and a half. So I'm gonna have to 2-part this one. But it's been awesome getting you on, man. I really appreciate the time.
Mate, thanks for having me. It was a good chat. I appreciate it.
Yeah.